And yeah, I'll do a scene like that. Every page has an illustration.
That's such an iconic thought when you think of Hamlet.
Yes, yes, it is. Yeah, I like Hamlet. It's my favorite. But I really liked doing Richard III too. That's a good play.
Did you visibly show him limping?
Kind
Wasn't he the
of.
king with the bad leg?
I actually showed him with a humpback.
That's right. Yeah.
He had scoliosis, and
that's right.
So I kind of did the whole scoliosis thing, but I didn't get too carried away with that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but
what was it about the Richard III that just appealed to you more so?
I don't know. I think it's just the real Richard III was so different from the Shakespeare Richard III. I think that's probably what it is. Richard III's not the horrible character. I mean, he wasn't a perfect man, but I don't think he was the horrible character that Shakespeare portrayed. He couldn't have done everything that Shakespeare portrayed him doing. It wasn't possible. He was in different places at different times that these things happened, and so he's actually, a lot of people in England actually revere Richard III. You know, they don't really look at him as Shakespeare's Richard III. But when I write my books, I also I change the language so it's easy to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Because I really liked Shakespeare when I was growing up, and I'm talking like 10, 11, 12 years old. I started reading, but you know, I grew up on a dairy farm, and you know, nobody taught Shakespeare, so I had to learn Shakespeare on my own. So that's why I'm doing these. I want it to be easier for kids to read Shakespeare. Yeah, and plots for all kinds of books and movies come from Shakespeare plots. So,
my son actually got a degree in Shakespeare, a theater degree, and one of my most favorite memories with him was the Shakespeare in the parks. And, every summer, whatever locale around town may have been appropriate for that particular play for that particular year. So that's my fondest memories of Shakespeare.
It would have been heaven to grow up in a town that was, you know, that leaned in that direction. Here in Morgantown, it's all about football. It's all about the Mountaineers. And it's, you know, you just hear about the Mountaineers. That's all you hear about. And,
right.
there's not a lot of culture. So yeah, it would have been wonderful to have been able to see Shakespeare in the park when I was a kid. So you're lucky.
I'm lucky to have such a talented son. He did some acting, now he's doing directing, and
nice.
I'm glad he's found that passion.
Oh, good for him. Yes.
And it's sad for so many of our actors and writers and other talented and creative people over the last year. I mean, sad for everybody, but they have been one of the particularly most affected groups.
Oh, isn't that the truth? Hey, Ed, he sounds like he'd be an interesting person on Rare Book Cafe too.
Let me ask him if that's a good point. I'll ask him if he wants to come on.
Yeah, I think that would be a great addition to have someone come on and talk about that.
He's constantly quoting Shakespeare to show how smart he is.
Oh, that's good. He's young. He's got that memory.
All right. Well, we still don't have Heinrich with us. What beverage is at your side this morning, Mary Kay?
Oh, it's just water, just ice water. I'm going to have a nice limoncello when I get off of here.
Ooh la la. One of my most favorite memories is hiking the Cinque Terre Trail in Italy. And every mile and a half or so, there would be a local with a limoncello stand in his backyard along the edge of the trail.
Oh, how nice. Well, Dennis and I had never tried it. We've been watching Stanley Tucci, and we saw it on his show last Sunday, and we were like, let's try that. So, delicious. We didn't have it when we were in Italy.
Gonna have to go back for both.
Yes.
Is Danish your husband?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Is he our world of books and literature and writing and graphicking?
Oh yeah, he's quite a good artist himself, and he loves books. Yeah, he's
Good.
a reader.
Good. Hey, there she is.
Hey,
And I guess if I could
good
see you, that means everybody else can see us.
Yes, yes, yeah.
Good
It's a
morning,
beautiful.
Mary Kay.
Good
One of
morning.
our previous guests, and Mary Kay Watson from Morgantown, West Virginia, an illustrator, a designer, an author, almost a Renaissance woman there, Mary Kay.
I wouldn't go that far, but thank you.
Anyway, welcome everybody to the Rare Book Cafe. We brought to you every week on Saturdays from 12:30 Eastern Standard Time for about 90 minutes plus or minus, where the talk about books is priceless. And your attendance and questions are welcome. Here we are again. Oh, he's joined us. Hey, Heinrich. Welcome. Glad to have you, everybody. Heinrich Sieukila? How am I doing? Oh, Lindsay. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Anyways, we're the only live stream weekly podcast about rare books. And I got to tell you, our founder and now technical genius, Alan Smith, has brought us some new features to the show this week. For the very first time, we're being YouTube live simultaneously, and of course we'll be on recorded as well, so you'll be able to access us any day of the week. Personally, I enjoy looking back on the show early morning in bed while I'm still laying there and don't want to get up. It's a great way to roll into the day. I'm Ed Markowitz from Portland, Oregon, of Montgomery Rare Books and Manuscripts. This week, we've got, along with Mary Kay, Heinrich Sierkler from Denmark, from the second largest city in Denmark, Aarhus. We'll hope to hear more about that. They're going to be visiting with us later in the show. So let me tell you what we've got going on for us today. After we break up here, we're going to go into the news of the week. Dr. Seuss. Last week we had Lawrence Ferlinghetti capturing the news, and this week Dr. Seuss is, and Lynn's going to share some commentary with us about that. Then we're going to have a short video from David Hess again from in Orange County, the bookman in Orange County, about things found in books. Then Heinrich will, from Denmark, will be sharing with us about book arts. Frank Norris, The Story Left Behind, and Mary Kay will be live with us. Mary Kay will have a recurring segment on illustrators. This week, she'll be talking about George de Maurier. Biblio Connecting. Oh, this is a fun one. Menus. We all like to go out to eat, and we look at this menu, and today they may be wrapped in a plasticized, but we've got a wonderful menu collector here, Henry Voigt, this week. So it's a long show. We're going to get started. Where am I? Where are we? Sorry, lost my place. Lynn Thompson, come on back. Lynn is going to share with us on Dr. Seuss.
Well, hello, everyone. Greetings from Chester, South Carolina. The children's author, Dr. Seuss, beloved for decades and one of the richest dead people in history, this week also became a political football, and a big one. As the goldfish fretted and the cat in the hat, this mess is so big and so deep and so tall, we cannot pick it up. There is no way at all. The estate of the writer announced this week that it will cease republishing his first book, 1937's And to Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street, with 5 others he produced into the 1950s. In an announcement on his birthday, Tuesday, which is also Read Across America Day in his honor, Seuss's heirs said they are always evaluating his 60-book output for relevance in changing times, and with the aid of educators, consultants, and other experts, had determined last year that the 6 books in question contained racial and ethnic stereotypes that were hurtful and wrong and really couldn't be cured. The Mulberry book sold 5,000 copies last year. Others of the 5 didn't sell enough to register in trade records. By contrast, Seuss's enduring hit Green Eggs and Ham sold 338,000 copies last year, and Oh, the Places You'll Go, over 500,000. The estate's 2020 gross income was over $33 million. Mulberry Street featured a slit-eyed yellow, quote, Chinaman, pigtailed, chopsticks and rice bowl in hand, trotting and subservient. If I Ran the Zoo has as a resident of the park a chieftain in a turban and illustrates 2 black men in grass skirts carrying exotic animals. If I Ran the Circus, another 1950s work, just moves the same tropes to a new venue. The announcement unleashed a firestorm of criticism, the gist being that the books were being banned in the service of cancel culture, a theory of self-victimization popular among conservatives. Booksellers keen to prove P.T. Barnum right again jacked up their prices. Alarmed online shoppers started ordering. The Cat in the Hat is currently the best-selling book on Amazon's U.S. store, closely followed by One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish, and Green Eggs and Ham, along with several other titles by the Doctor. Altogether, 15 Dr. Seuss publications were in Amazon's top 20 list yesterday. But the fact is, and this was what triggered a memory in the back of my head, and I looked into a bit, was that revisions to children's books are nothing new. In 1812, the Brothers Grimm revised their tales, turning the evil mothers in traditional fairy tales to wicked stepmothers because they wanted to preserve the sanctity of motherhood. In recent decades, works by Hergé and Jean de Brunhoff, the Tintin and Babar Kids series, have weathered sharp criticism for modeling European colonial imperialism and racist views. Tintin in the Congo, first published in 1930, was revised several times by its author-illustrator to soften its overt racism and animal cruelty as late as 1975. English publishers refused to produce it at all until 1991. As I'll cover in the story behind the story later this month, Hugh Lofting's Dr. Dolittle books, published from 1920 to 1952, were notoriously racist even in their time. His son undermined the current argument that altering such content destroys freedom and literary merit by lamely protesting that if his dad had lived long enough, he'd surely have rewritten them. Another wildly successful mid-century British author, Enid Blyton, was famous for the basket of deplorable stereotypes she recycled in the service of her sales figures. Unrepentant, she said she was uninterested in the views of anyone over the age of 12, claiming that half the attacks on her work were motivated by jealousy and that the rest came from, quote, stupid people who don't know what they're talking about because they've never read any of my books. Author Roald Dahl's Charlie and the Chocolate Factory originally portrayed the factory's workers, the Oompa Loompas, as African pygmies. In the 1970s, Dahl revised the work to make them simple indentured servants from a fictional country called Loompa Land. Kids author Richard Scarry, another mega publisher, and his heirs have routinely updated his books to remove or update outdated elements and stereotypes for decades. One of my personal favorites is the Scottish author Helen Bannerman, who spent 30 years in India as a doctor's wife. She's given publishers fits since the 1899 debut of her first book, The Story of Little Black Sambo, a bestseller critics of the time extolled as an example of a resourceful Indian boy flourishing under the British Raj. Sally Bannerman, by the way, milked her experience in India for all it had. Her oeuvre over the next 40 years included the stories of Little Black Mingo, Little Black Quib, Little Black Quibba. Let me flip the page here. Little Black Quasha, Little Kettlehead, Little Black Bobtail, and Sambo and the Twins. In 1932, Langston Hughes called Little Black Sambo written in the Pickaninny style. After a 1927 re-illustrated Macmillan edition, turned the boy into a stereotypical rural American African-American kid and cemented him into the racist folklore of the Jim Crow South. Later versions tried to soften the effect by changing his name to Sam, or the title to things like Little Brave Sambo. A 2003 edition kept the title, but included a set of more racially sensitive illustrations, portraying Sambo, in his publisher's words, as, quote, a glorious and unabashedly African child. It was chosen for the 2003 Kirkus Editor's Choice list. One scholar reacted, I don't see how I can get past the title and what it means. It would be like trying to do, quote, Little Black Darky, and saying, as long as I fix up the character so he doesn't look like a darky on the plantation, it's okay. Another favorite example is the 38 books in the Stratemeyer Syndicate's Tom Swift series, published between 1910 and 1941 and mostly written by Howard Garris, who made his own name as the author of the Uncle Wiggily stories. Swift was a boy genius inventor of mostly things electrical. He had a Negro servant named Eradicate Simpson. Brad was the endless butt of racist jokes and also vied for Tom's attentions with his bodyguard, Koku, a South American prince turned into an American menial. One of Swift's adventures, Tom Swift and his electric rifle, lives on today in the name of a law enforcement tool. It was published in 1911, writing the publicity of ex-President Theodore Roosevelt's year-long African safari, and featured Tom and his pals pursuing profit and fame on a wild African continent peopled by tribes both simple and savage. Quote, elephant shooting in Africa, my, he exclaimed, with my new electric rifle. What a fellow couldn't do in the dark continent. With the price of ivory soaring, there's a chance for us all to get a lot of money. So off they went with Tom's stun gun, using it in an aside to save a Hottentot village from stampeding buffalo. Quote, had it not been for the white men, the novel declares, the native village, which consisted only of frail huts, would have been completely wiped out by the animals. Flash forward to New York City 20 years later, where a college professor's son read Tom Swift and his electric gun and was so enthralled that he became a scientist himself and took the first letter of the title, each word in the title, to make an acronym for his most famous invention, the taser, used today against people rather than animals. Cancel culture, which all this is being attributed to, is the latest insult thrown about from people, almost always political or socially conservative, who brought us woke and political correctness gone mad. Cancel culture is, in fact, a myth, a meaningless, slippery term that means whatever people want it to mean, just so long as their points of view are immune from question or criticism. In fact, no one is being censored by Dr. Seuss's estate's announcement. Nobody's free speech is being stifled. Dr. Seuss has not been banned, and the nameless they, upon whom all things can be blamed, is not in fact ascendant over our minds. But that's been no impediment to some of the usual suspects of the media and political classes. Fox News mentioned the story 139 times last Tuesday alone, with its B-roll video showing not the unread, largely forgotten books at issue, but shelves groaning with the author's most popular titles, helping the staggering jump in online sales. For their part, Fox News personalities weren't even sure what the issue was in what I saw. Fox Nation regular Tyrus said he hadn't seen the illustrations, and the former presidential press secretary, Dana Perino, said the problem is, apparently, the illustrations. So why don't they just redraw them? On its website, the network ran a story calling prominent Democrats hypocrites for posting for photos in the past reading non-withdrawn Dr. Seuss books. Congressman Kevin McCarthy decried an imagined left-wing campaign to, quote, tell us what to say. And Glenn Beck said the episode marks, quote, the end of freedom in America. Tucker Carlson proclaimed, when the people in charge, again, we don't know who they are, but they're up to no good. When the people in charge cancel Dr. Seuss, what they're really trying to do is eliminate a very specific kind of mid-century American culture, a culture that championed meritocracy and colorblindness and the superiority of individual achievement over tribal identity. All this went on in a week where the same people were raging that Disney had canceled the Muppets and that Hasbro degendered the genderless Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head, who had no gender to remove. I'm so old, my Mr. Potato Head didn't even come with a potato. Indeed, among those canceling denouncing the cancellation of the Seuss 6 are people who helped build the American Library Association's annual list of banned books, a monotonously small and repetitive list of topics. Governments used to routinely ban books, and more recently, Pope Benedict denounced the Harry Potter series. Several years ago, when a new movie of Beauty and the Beast contained a fleeting suggestion that a character was gay, there was outrage. Outrage at the inclusion of a gay character in a film about a woman buffalo romance. A film whose characters included a talking candle who couldn't gutter fast enough for my taste. What people are being goaded to do with this stuff, and it's just truly been a remarkable week, is get angry about something they can't fix, don't much understand, and that it is at heart a free market mix of business and ethics choices. A professor at the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education explained, and certainly this is how I remember reading the Seuss books 60 years ago. She said, folks are not remembering the text itself. They are remembering the affective experiences they had around those texts. White children or parents might not have noticed the offensive anti-Asian stereotyping in Mulberry Street. For my part, I was just a 7 or 8-year-old reading a cool book. For his part, Dr. Seuss even revised his own works when he was alive and acknowledged the changing of the times. He came to regret his World War II anti-Japanese cartoons. He changed the Chinaman in Mulberry Street in the 1970s, explaining, quote, I had a gentleman with a pigtail. I colored him yellow and called him a Chinaman. That's the way things were done 50 years ago. In later editions, I refer to him as a Chinese man. I have taken the color out of the gentleman and removed the pigtail, and now he looks like an Irishman. Seuss died in 1991. In 2017, artists with works featured at an exhibit in the Dr. Seuss Museum refused to come, objecting to the same Chinaman image being used in a permanent museum mural. The museum later took it down. Australian children's author Lily Wilkinson, writing in The Guardian this week, said children's literature sits at an awkward crossroads where it is expected to be art, education, and moral instruction all at once. Children's books are designed to teach our kids how to read, to teach them about the world, about themselves and their bodies, about how to be kind, about society's morals and values. This is true of all children's literature, she goes on, but it is particularly true of books by Dr. Seuss, which do all these things deliberately and explicitly, which is why I'm not at all surprised that Seuss's estate has decided to cease publication of 6 titles due to their racist portrayals of people of color. To do otherwise, she says, would be disrespectful to Seuss's legacy of kindness and empathy. And for my part, I want to let Dr. Seuss have the last word, recalling that he once said, "It's not how you start that counts. It's what you are at the finish."
Lynn,
Yes.
as usual, you're very erudite. And for you to have put together that editorial in such a short period of time, that was quite comprehensive.
Well, my parents despaired of me when I was a child because, and well into adulthood for that matter, because they saw my mind as being akin to the warehouse at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. And so when this all burst at the first of the week, I thought, now there's going to be trouble. And then I started thinking back to old controversies that have arisen over books. And what really triggered it was that on the show here over the years, we've covered instances where chance mentions of forgotten books generated flurries of interest and spikes in prices. There was an instance where Cliff Richards of the Rolling Stone mentioned a pirate book he had read as a kid, and all of a sudden they were $500 a copy. And more recently, John Lithgow did a one-man show on Broadway in which he read from a favorite book of his in his youth, a collection of stories by Somerset Maugham. The book forgotten, the author nearly so. And all of a sudden, the few copies that could be had anywhere on the internet were going for hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And then I started remembering other authors who revised their own works, publishers that took them out of circulation because they just didn't sell. And then there are other books that live on. Really, any book, no matter how reprehensible any individual may think its content, will find a market. I came across a book years ago called Enus Africanus, about an ex-slave suddenly liberated by the Union armies in South Carolina, cast about by fate to points unknown, and spending years fighting his way back to find his master and his old life on the plantation, because how could anything be better than that? Well, it's just a cringingly embarrassing book in modern terms. And yet, if you look it up on the internet, you'll find lots of small publishers selling it briskly to this very day. So these things are what, as I mentioned in the write-up, one of the things that struck me this week was just how this one blew up into such a big political thing, where the very fate of America seems to rest on these 6 little kids' books. And I thought that's something that we need to be reminded about, that people get overworked sometimes.
Lynn, I'm beginning to think your parents were right.
Oh, they were right about that and a lot of other stuff.
Lee, what's your take on the events and the topics of the last week with respect to either Dr. Seuss or just the social and anthropological aspect?
That sounds impressive. I haven't made a cent off of Dr. Seuss this week, I'm sorry to report, probably because I only have one of his books online, and it's not one of the ones in question. But Dr. Seuss is alive and well here in Calhoun, Georgia. This week has traditionally been Dr. Seuss week in our elementary and primary schools. And this week, my grandchildren, who are in the 2nd grade and kindergarten, celebrated a different Dr. Seuss book every day of the week, complete with optional costumes, if they wished, and appropriate food for green eggs and ham. They did The Cat in the Hat. And one of my close friends here in Calhoun portrays the Cat in the Hat in the schools. He's 80, but he still goes from school to school portraying the Cat in the Hat. They did Green Eggs and Ham. They did the Many Colors. They did Fox and Socks, complete with funny colored socks. And they did the Sleep Book. And so a lot of these, stressed kindness and inclusion and, various things. But this has been a tradition in Calhoun for a long time, and I don't see any changes coming here, to be honest about it. Though I certainly think the publishers and Seuss Enterprises did the right thing about taking these off. And I was glad to hear Lynn say that I had looked back at some of the World War II stuff from Seuss, which I had never really looked at or seen, and was absolutely appalled at some of the cartoons. And so I'm glad to hear Lynn say that he was sorry that he had done that at that time.
Just checking here. We've got a comment from Sophia Bogle in Ashland, Oregon, one of our biggest champions and frequent guests on the show. And she mentioned that a bookseller in Ashland had a little black Sambo in the window, which was subjected to violence by, this happened to be a Black Lives Matter movement, but for whatever social disturbance there was, I think it's fair to say none of us believe that violence is appropriate, while words are always free speech. So far, everybody. Oh, one other person I wanted to mention that's joined us. That's David Launderville from Sacramento, California. David has been simul-watching us. I think, is that a word? Simul-watching? He's been watching the show both on Facebook and on YouTube for the very first time today. So to all our viewers out there, everything you've seen today has been live. Of course, we have periodic segments that are going to require to be on a pre-recorded video. And we're about to have one of those coming up in a moment. And that's going to be Things Found in Old Books by David Hess. But if you can't watch us live, please now tune into us on pre-recorded shows on both Facebook and on YouTube. Okay, let's start bringing that video up. Thanks again, Lynn. You're going to be back in a video, and then Lee, you and I will be seeing each other again later in the show. Good to have those two companions. Let's see who else is signed in here today. Lauren Flores, Matt Mina, some of our really regular, some of our really loyal viewers back on the show. Matt, we've been talking about having you back on again these days. Matt, think about a good topic you might want to bring to the show. I know you were on before I was watching, but I heard you did a good job. Lauren from Plumas County, California says that in Read Across America, they did a celebration of Dr. Seuss's birthday this past week. And Read Across America, I mean, that's a national-wide movement. So it's good to see that Dr. Seuss is being honored where it needs to be with the kids. Dr. Seuss taught so many of us to read, and it's time we should all say thanks to him. He wrote plenty of books, and there's still plenty of copies out there at reasonable prices. Don't fall into this tulip bulb pricing mania. Those prices are going to come crashing down again soon. Anyways, okay, coming up on the video. Are we ready, Alan?
Hello, this is David Hess for our weekly visit of Things Found in Used Books. And I work at I own the Bookman in Orange, California. And I've been a bookseller for over 40 years. And in that time, I've found a lot of stuff in used books. And I'm here to share a few things that I've found, recently. We'll start right off today with The Art Through the Ages by Gardner, which is still being published to this day. Newer, better versions, big, lots of pictures. This has a lot of black and white pictures. This one here was published in 1926. And I found a couple things in it, just kind of randomly stuck in the pages of this book. And somewhat interesting, I think so. One is for Foothill Cleaners. Yukon 32217. This is in Cucamonga, California. So oftentimes I will find business cards used as bookmarks in books. It's fairly common. I love to find these old ones, though. These old ones from the Yukon 3.2, that was probably easily back in the 60s or 70s, or this actually looks even older, so like from the 50s. So long forgotten businesses that still had their cards survived in a book years later. And also, there's no date on this card, and I do find, especially Christmas cards, a lot of Christmas cards come through. But this one was just kind of unique. I never really seen anything like this, and I have a feeling this is from the era of the 20s, 26. The artwork, it has no inscription, no date. It just says "Merry Christmas" with the very unique kind of artwork. So that was found in that book. On to our next book. We found Visages de la France, a textbook from 1936. And in this book, I just found an order form for Plus Products and a brochure from Plus Products. And this is basically pushing Adele Davis, who wrote those Let's Eat Right to Keep Fit, which honestly, as a used bookseller, those books still sell to this day. Adele Davis, I keep on the shelf when they come in. They're old and they were published in the 50s. And this brochure was published in 1960. And so if you use this brochure here, you could get a signed copy of this book. You order it for your friends, and it even shows Adele Davis signing the copy for you with your name, and they're going to pack it up, and they're going to send it right to your house. A signed copy of Adele Davis. So you got the brochure, you got the envelope, you're all set. Now here is a Science and Health with the Key to the Scripture. This is Mary Baker Eddy. Her stuff still around to this day. It's got a gift inscription from 1919 in Linwood, Virginia. So, and in this book from 1919, I know last week I shared a report card from Hood College. Well, this week I found another report card. It's Gordon Junior High School of the District of Columbia. And in the envelope is the report card for William McCormick. And it was published, or it was written in 1945, 2/2/45. And there's William's grades. Didn't do too well in English. He did horrible in math, got an F, but he got it up to a D the 2 following semesters. And he did okay in orchestra. So there is his card on either side. Forever put away in a book. And I'm sure he forgot it quite easily. And finally, in this book here, it's The Flesh of Dawn by Henry Turner Bailey. It's an inspirational book, and it's good to look at. It has kind of cool illustrations, but in it, it's from 1910. But in it is, and I've talked about this before, bookmarks from stores, from the long past bookstores. Now this one, I love this bookmark. I mean, it is like, it's kind of almost Art Deco illustrations. I did some research, and it was big in the 30s. It's the Concord Books, Times Square, America's oldest bargain bookshop, Concord Books, the Paramount Building in New York City. And it just has a gorgeous design on it. And it was a real treasure to find. And this is the kind of bookmark that I personally will just hang on to. I love this kind of stuff. And that was a pleasure to find. It really was. And well, that's it for today. And I said last week, if anybody has stuff that they've found in a book that they would like to share with me and our guests here at the podcast, you should send me a picture and a brief description of what you found at info@ebookman.com. info@ebookman.com, and we can share with the audience. And remember, books sometimes have more inside of them than just the words themselves. Thank you very much for joining me, and I hope to see you again next week.
Want to ask him. Sometimes things are put inside of books on purpose. As he pointed out, he pulled out a promotional item there. I once picked up that 75 volume set of Zane Grey. You know, the ones with the ivory linen covers and the red and blue titling on the spine. And inside the front cover, they would always have the promotions for the next issues to make sure that you were subscribed, the subscription, basically. And what a tremendous find that was to not only find all 72 volumes, sometimes you got to marry them from different places, but to have all the subscription papers still inside. So I'm going to ask him how that adds to or differentiates in a collecting value of a book next time. Before we move on to our next segment, I'd like to acknowledge some other visitors that have checked in. We've got Charles Tariquez from San Diego, Phyllis Proctor from St. Augustine, Florida, our oldest city in America, St. Augustine, Michael Bathrick from Pennsylvania. This is really fun and interesting. For the last couple of weeks, all of our visitors have been from around the world. I think we had people from 4 continents here 2 weeks ago. And this week, we've got people from all 4 corners of the United States, from San Diego to Portland, over to West Virginia, down to Florida, and people in between. It's just so much fun to see the variety of the people we have attracted to the show. All right, coming up is our next guest, Heinrich Sierkler from Denmark. Heinrich, are you with us? Hey.
Yes, I'm with you.
Okay, great. Hi, how are you?
I'm great.
Oh my gosh, look at all those books behind you. Where are you today?
I'm at my my library room.
Wow.
So
tell us what's in the stacks there. What kind of things do you collect? What are we looking at?
I collect book bindings, books about books, illustrated books, Danish authors from the 20th century. And that's mainly behind me. The books from printers, the Danish printing history. In 2017, I wrote a book about Danish book design in the 20th century, and I collect, well, on the behalf of my collective work for, well, 10, 15 years. It took me to collect this, and I wrote this book about Danish book design and Danish printers in the 20th century, because nobody had really written about that in about 60 or 70 years in Denmark. So
what is the hierarchy of the publishing industry in Denmark with respect to small press, private press, and production press?
Well, today, Denmark is a small country with 6 million people. So, and I think today the printing industry in Denmark is mainly a lot of printing houses are shut down, have been shut down for the last 10, 20 years. A lot of common books in Denmark are being printed abroad on the Balkan and the Baltics because it's much cheaper to get it printed there. But in the last 10 years, I guess, there's been a rising in small, not small printing offices, but people are making, not, you could not say private press, but small books, literature and poetry, and it's mainly of people of interest in books and literature who makes great books. Where the typography is good, and they care about how the book looks like, not the industrial kind of books that you mostly see in Denmark. But there's a new stream of small firms who publish small books in a more aesthetic kind of way.
I understand that you've put together a little presentation for us.
Yeah.
Alan, I think if you can bring that up, and we'll let Siegfried roll through it.
This book is from 1896. It's printed by a guy called Simon Bernstein, and I guess he was the first small printer of private presses in Denmark. In 1895 he visited William Morris in London and got inspired from Morris, but he was not able to make a big printing office. So he made small books. This copy is made in 139 copies in 1896, and it's inspired by Morris, but it's also inspired by English, the art and crafts movement in Britain, and it's in 1888, a guy called F. Frederick Hendrickson established. He wrote an article piece on the Danish book design, the state of the Danish book design. He was criticizing it a lot, and he founded Forening for Boghåndværk, a foundation who worked for better book design in Denmark. And he made the first school in teaching in book design, typography, and printing, and book bindings in Denmark. The first educational establishment in 1891. And from then on, the Danish book design got the private presses in Denmark is not the same as, for example, in the US, when you have the small printing, the private presses. But the guy like Simon Bernstein was a very small printing house. He had actually almost no money to make his books, and they were very small books and very narrow in the topics. But he was making books for his for interest in book design mainly, not for, should you call for making money of it. And he didn't make any money of it at all. So, but I think it's a nice little piece and a great example of Danish book design about the turn into the 20th century kind of thing. And that's the next one is in Jutland, where I live, in the west of Jutland. There was a small printing house with a printer called Niels P. Thomsen, who took over a small printing house in 1900, and he was very inspired by also Morris, but also the Roycroft, the shop in the U.S. and some U.S. printers. And in 1911, he made this small private press piece which is regarded as the first regular private press piece in Denmark. Printers usually from then on started on publishing small prints around Christmas or New Year to send out as well a kind of Christmas cards to their customers and their friends of the printing house, and just to you could see how good they were, and how if they got new types or typefaces or something, and you could you could see the state of the printing house. They were in it by the private presses. They put out the private, and this piece is a text by a Danish author called Jeppe Aakjær, who was a Danish rural writer, very popular in the 1910s and 20s. And Thomsen made a bunch of private press releases at New Year's this is from 1911, and he made it on from 1916 until Aakjær died in 1930. And it's design-wise, it's very inspired by, I think, English private press, Cobden Sanderson and Morris. But it has a kind of a special Danish touch about it. At Thomsen's printing office was very small, and he only made small books because he couldn't manage to make larger things. But many of the people who worked with him later on made their own career in book printing in Denmark, and got quite big when they got further on from the Thomsen office. And that's a piece from 1915. In 1915, the Danish constitution was revised for the third time. It was in 1915 that the women got the right to be elected to vote in Denmark. And this piece is printed by a guy called Christian Kungsted, who's also had a very small printing office in various places in Zealand, outside Copenhagen, just outside Copenhagen. He also made very small prints, but he was very interested in different typefaces, and bought typefaces for the prints he made. He bought new typefaces for if he thought it was appropriate for the print, the text he was going to print. And he printed this piece in one copy for the Danish state. It's today it's on Christiansborg, the place of the Danish Parliament, and he made just a few copies more that he printed for friends of the house, like this piece. This piece was printed for a Danish historian and given to him, and now I got it. So it's a copy of the copy in Christiansborg. And this is a piece from the German philosopher Emmanuel Kant, who was printed in 1923 by a typographer and printer in Denmark called Kai Hjort. Also a very small printing office. I guess it's the guys I've shown to you for now. They had their own ideas in spite of making money of it. But Kai Hjort has a very small printing house in Copenhagen. And he, from 1923, this is the first year he made this New Year's print, as they call it in Denmark. And he made such a print every year till he died in 1963. And this piece is only 8 pages, but in these 8 pages, he just shows every kind of book design things and meshes. You can tell the title, and it's I think if you're a typographer, you regard this as the perfect piece, I guess. And in 1936, 12 young typographers in Copenhagen, they made a club called Grafisk Cirkel. They're very inspired by the functional typography from Germany, from Jan Tischold and other the Russian supremacists. And they had their jobs in printing houses, in big printing houses around Copenhagen mostly, but they wanted to experiment, and I think this is a piece of the most experimental kind. It's a small piece where the pages are printed. The pages are in orange paper, and this is the binding. The binding is in kind of concrete with the title put on a metal bar, and they were just printed. They just printed them for themselves. They sent them to each other, and they had to make comments on them. So you said this is strange, this is rubbish, this is fabulous. And the printer who made this one, called Heinrich, who was a very inspiring man in Danish book design in the 30s and 40s. He made this, and his colleagues at Grafisk Cirkel actually didn't answer him. They didn't give him any response to this piece. Was sent out in only 25 copies is made of it. And he wrote a letter to them and said, "Oh, why didn't you answer me? Is it because you think it's rubbish, or are you just so thrilled about it you can't express it?" But that's really one of the most exquisite kind of private prints in Denmark, I guess. One of the most strange kind of private prints. Yeah, and you can see it in the pages from Jacob Ehrbar. It's text he took from a German piece about Jacob Ehrbar, a writer. It just typed that, and you can see there's no margin, and the paper is kind of coated, so it's very functionalistic. It's very 30-ish, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that's last picture. There's a Copenhagen printer called Folmer Nordlund, who's making his own printing shop in 1928. He was very inspired by British book design, a very clean book design, not much equipment about typographical equipment. And he had started in 1937. He started making a calendar each year. So he was sending out to his colleagues and friends of the printing house, and the print every year was a story about from Hans Christian Andersen, and he made that from 1937 until his death. After his death, his son made the last one in 1974, and every year it was a story about from Hans Christian Andersen, and a wide range of Danish illustrators. The best of Danish illustrators illustrated these stories. So they also tell a story about the development of Danish book design through the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s. And I guess, I think the interesting thing for me of Danish private presses is that the private press things and pieces in Denmark represents a kind of avant-garde in printings that you can see later on in more common prints and more common books, but they got inspired by each other making these private prints, and that's, you can see in Denmark, Denmark is known for the Danish design in furniture, for example. Finn Juhl and Hans Jørgen Wegener and Børge Mogensen. And that's I think it's a thing that develops through the 20th century from handcrafted furniture and handcrafted books, and throughout the 20th century they got industrialized. And I think that the intriguing thing about it is that they try to cope with making industrial books in an industrial way, making books cheap, but also they make them aesthetical, satisfying. So they have to manage to juggle with these two things. And I think that's the interesting part for me, because it's the Danish private press isn't the same as American private press, because I think American or English private press often is a very small, luxurious kind of printing house.
Well, Heinrich,
who's not making common books.
Yeah. You're also quite a historian. Some of those stories you were telling were fascinating. But looking forward, who is on the scene today? Are there publishers that are out there today that 100 years from now, Danes will be talking about?
I guess so. I think there's in Denmark. If you asked me 10 years ago, I'd be very skeptical about the future for you can sign handcrafted books or aesthetical, satisfying books, I guess, because we are a small country and the printing houses are there are only a few left, actually. But I think there's throughout the last 10 years there's grown a kind of a segment of people who of course interested in the content of books, but also how the book looked like, and they had to connect the kind of aesthetic in the content of the book and how the book looked like, and the good thing about that is that they are not big publishing houses. They can use the money that is necessary to make these books satisfying in a design way, I guess. And well, perhaps they will never grow big, but that's not the intention, I guess, because they do it by heart, I guess.
Being on this side of the pond, we appreciate your shout out to the Roycrofters. That was nice to hear a little go. That's a very collectible book. A series of
actually
books.
There has been a connection between Denmark and, for example, Niels P. Thomsen, who was closely associated with the Danish American librarian Jens Christian Bay, who was librarian in Chicago, and also a Library of Congress, and he made a lot of private presses at the Torch Press in Iowa, in Cedar Rapids, but also made a similar kind of private press prints at Thomsen's place in Denmark. So Bay sent a lot of American private press books to Thomsen and other book persons in Denmark who were interested in American private presses.
Well, thank you, Heinrich. It's in this day and age, in this day of technology, it's good to be able to see you via video. If you ever make it over here to the United States, let us know. It's time for us all to start getting back together in person again. Hopefully someday.
Whenever.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Bye.
What a pleasure. Okay. Always fascinating. Let's see who else we've got. Books. Don't you just love it? That's why you're here today, right? Books. To hear about books, to talk about books, to listen to experts from all around the world about books. Last week we had somebody here from the Alexandria Library in Egypt. This is your place to go for books. Let's see who else has checked in. We got a guy here named Graham Markowitz from the U.S. Capitol. Greetings from D.C. Wonder who he is. Anyways, welcome to our next guest, Mary Kay. Mary Kay Watson. Are you there?
Hey, Ed.
Oh, I hear you.
Yeah.
Can't wait to see you. Mary Kay is from Morgantown, West Virginia. She is a wonderful illustrator, an author. Look at the scenery behind her. Isn't that beautiful? Pottery collector. I told her it was so good to see somebody dressed in bright colors and having something besides books as a background in real life. Welcome, Mary Kay. What are you going to talk about today?
Well, today is the birthday of George du Maurier, and I thought I would talk about him. I actually didn't realize it was his birthday until I did the research, and then I looked at the date I was going to be on, and I thought, oh my gosh, what a coincidence. His birthday is today. So that's who I'm going to talk about.
Great. Excellent. You got a slideshow or we?
Yeah, I gave the pictures to Alan, and he's got that is a picture of George du Maurier in his later years. So I'll just go ahead and go through this if you'd
You're
like
in
me to. Now
charge.
that is one of his cartoons, and let me just go ahead and start reading, and whenever I come to where a picture needs to go, I'll just mention it. And my segment, we've called it Did You Know? Did you know Daphne du Maurier, prolific writer of such novels as Jamaica Inn, The Birds, Rebecca, and many others, had a grandfather who was an illustrator, a cartoonist, and also an author. She also had a sister who was a novelist, but today I'm going to speak about her grandfather, George du Maurier. George Louis Pamela Busson du Maurier, nicknamed Kiki, was born March 6, 1834 in Paris, France. He would have been 187 today. He was brought up to believe that he was of aristocracy born. His grandfather, a tradesman, a glassblower by trade, had actually fled Paris during the Revolution to avoid charges of fraud being brought against him. He added du Maurier to the family name to hide from his creditors and sound more grandiose and important. George started out working in a chemist lab, but hated the work. He enrolled into art school instead, studying under Charles Gleyre. His friends and fellow students at the time were James Whistler, Edward Poynter, Kate Greenaway, John Millais, George Eliot, which is the pen name of Mary Ann Evans, Edward Burne-Jones, and later in his life he became a great friend of the novelist Henry James. Imagine everything you ever thought about the art world in Paris in the mid-19th century. Bohemian, very Oscar Wilde, opium, alcohol, absinthe, nude models, parties till dawn, rich aristocracy who wanted to show support and sponsorship to up-and-coming artists. Artists who had time to study and play hard and become fully immersed into the Paris nightlife. George became seduced by this life. He studied hard and became very good at drawing, but his one weakness, as described by his granddaughter Daphne, was hypnosis. It's unclear whether these hypnosis sessions that George practiced were drug-induced. What is clear is that he not only could hypnotize others, he could also go into a trance-like state himself and find his own creativity. The control it gave George became addictive, and it's clear that it went from putting models into trances so they could stay in one position for upwards of 40 minutes at a time to pure entertainment and control over his subjects. He even trained his fellow artists how to hypnotize. It's why his future wife, Emma Whitewick, wouldn't marry him until he promised to give up the bad habits he'd learned in Paris. And I've already shown you the cartoon drawing that he did. There we go. And it's kind of a cute cartoon. I don't know if you can read it, but he mentions something about books that he has read, and she says to him that she doesn't read books, she writes them. And I think that's pretty cute. George eventually gave up his life in Paris and moved to London. He got a job as a cartoonist at the weekly magazine Punch. Before long, his representations of Victorian life were all the rage, as was his wit, and he acquired quite a following. At the age of 23, George had suffered a detached retina in his left eye. His eyesight was always a significant problem for him, and it was always difficult to draw, but his work doesn't seem to suffer. George drew 2 cartoons a week for Punch and illustrated many books, including some for Thomas Hardy, Elizabeth Gaskell, and Wilkie Collins. He is credited with illustrating the first detective novel, The Notting Hill Mystery, written by Charles Warren Adams. George and Emma had 5 children. 2 of their children, Gerald and Sylvia, went on to have fabled histories of their own. Gerald became an actor and theater manager, but his most famous role is that of father to Daphne du Maurier. Sylvia married Arthur Llewellyn Davies, and they had 5 boys. Sylvia and Arthur both died in their early 40s and left the care and custody of their sons in the hands of James Barrie, better known as J.M. Barrie, the writer of Peter Pan. More about the Davies boys and J.M. Barrie the next time we talk. George had acquired enough wealth that he and the family were able to move into a country home. His friend Henry James was a regular Sunday visitor, and he and George spent long hours talking. One of their favorite subjects was hypnosis. Although George had given up that part of his life for Emma, he never was rid of the practice of putting himself into a trance-like state and going off into an imaginary world. Decades later, Daphne would also claim to be able to drift in and out of a daydream state that probably accounts for some of her imaginative and wonderful novels. Henry James was also interested in hypnosis, as were many during the Victorian age. George shared with him his ideas about a novel where an older man hypnotizes a young woman in doing his will against her own. He offered the ideas to Henry because Henry, was suffering quite a slump in his own writing. Henry told George it was too great a gift and encouraged George to write the book himself. After failures to attain an editor's seat on the board of Punch and his eyesight getting worse, George set about to write his first novel. It wouldn't be the one that he and Henry James had discussed. It would be Peter Ibbotson. And I think I have a picture of that first novel, Peter Ibbotson. That one's his last novel, The Martian. And that's Trilby. And that is Peter Ibbotson. Thank you, Alan. The first part of the novel tells in great detail George's own childhood told through its main character, Peter. He talks at length about dreaming true, which is how George always described the trances he could get into and travel back to the happier time in the past. The rest of the book is a mystery and love story based purely in the author's imagination. His second novel, Trilby, published in 1894. It is the novel that he wanted Henry James to write. Trilby is an artist model who Svengali transforms into a diva under his spell. Our cultural understanding of what a Svengali is comes from this book. There was merchandise, a hat, songs, dances, and even a town in Florida named after Trilby. A bestseller then and still in print now. And when I say a bestseller, it's sort of an understatement. It was quite the rage. His third and last book is The Martian. This book is autobiographical in nature, but written in novel form. It has nothing to do with the recent movie called The Martian. In the story, the main character, Barty, dreams he has a Martian spirit, Marcia, that watches over him. All of George's books are still in print. The firsts are all illustrated by him, and they are still entertaining and relevant today. The next time, I'm going to talk a bit about the connection between the du Maurier family and the man from Scotland who wouldn't grow up. And that is my...
People who knows who and who's related to whom else. What a wonderful time that must have been.
Yes, yes.
Hey, one of these days, Mary Kay, we're going to have you back to talk about your illustrations, but if I'm not mistaken, I think you might just have something there at hand. You got anything you can hold up to the camera to show us a little bit of your own razzmatazz?
Oh, I'm working on Hamlet right now. So cover my face with it.
Is that intended to be a page for a book?
This is a page for the book. That's a picture of Ophelia. She's in distress right now. She's telling Polonius about Hamlet approaching her half dressed. That's for that scene. And then this is a picture of Hamlet reading a book. And here is a picture of Polonius reading the letter that Hamlet wrote to Ophelia. So I've got about 98 illustrations done for the book so far. I'm about a third of the way through the book.
The one that I want to see is the skull.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much.
I actually like the ghost too. I like drawing his father's ghost. Well, you're welcome. You have a good afternoon.
And you come back and see us, y'all.
Yes.
By Mary Kay. Okay, we're going to slip Lynn Thompson's segment about the story behind the story to the end of the show. Lynn's already been on today, but it will be available on the video version of the show. So next we're going to move into Jerry Morris and Henry Voigt talking about menus. Henry is a vice president of the Ephemera Society of America, and he's a collector of vintage menus going way back. Next week, there's going to be a follow-up interview when Henry discusses with Jerry about his collection, and his display is going to be at the Grolier Club. So whenever we finally get out of this pandemic and can travel to New York City again, that's where we need to go. Okay.
Hello again. I'm Jerry Morris, and welcome to Biblioconnecting. One of the things that bibliophiles enjoy is reading about another bibliophile's collection, whether it be published in a book, in a magazine, or online in a blog. There aren't too many bloggers who blog about their collections. Most bloggers post book reviews. But today, you're going to hear from a blogger who's been writing about his collection of menus since 2010, Henry Voigt, member of the Grolier Club, the Ephemera Society of America, and the Library Company of Philadelphia. And he is the author of the blog, The American Menu. Hello, Henry.
Hello, Jerry. Thanks for having me.
Yep.
Well, let me put it on the share screen here. There we go. Well, it's a pleasure to join you today and talk about my blog, The American Menu. As you say, I've been doing it now for 10 years and exploring what I can learn from the minor transient documents of everyday life called menus. So the blog is easy to find. It's just that theamericanmenu.com. And it appears like that. There's about 150 essays on the blog now, beginning with material starting in the early 1840s, which is when my collection begins, and about the time that menus began to be used in the United States. You might say, why menus? Well, they're the only documents that, generally speaking, that speak to how people have dined outside the home over time. So what I thought I would do is introduce you to the blog and then give you an example of one of how the theme works. So this is how the page looks. On the right-hand column, there's a little introduction called Welcome, talking about when menus first appeared in society. And the second paragraph in particular, when I talk about menus aid our cultural history, and our cultural memory, rather. They provide historical evidence, not only what people were eating, but what they were doing, with whom they were doing it, who they were trying to be, and what they valued. So in other words, the blog is about social history as much as it is about culinary history. And then I go on to say, deciphering the story behind a particular menu often requires great sleuth work. I'll give an example of that later. And that's what I'll be undertaking on this website. So this basically is the theme of the blog. I've picked an example here. This is something that was posted on January 12th of this year. It's a short essay, Breakfast on the Mississippi, about a steamboat named the James Montgomery in about 1858. And the way the blog is organized, you can see here, I show the first paragraph, and then there's a button that says read more, which then takes you into the article. This is the second page of that article, and it has only one menu reproduced and has a couple of paragraphs at the end. So it's a good use of the example. You can click on the menus and they will expand so that people can actually read them themselves. On the right now, we have labels, and you can see that the material is organized by various periods of time. 1880 to 1895, there's 53 essays. So you can see the Gilded Age is almost at the heart of where this blog is situated time-wise, but it comes all the way up to the present day. You can also search by African American history, militaria, New York City, San Francisco, which is another great restaurant town, unusual game dishes, and women's history. And then further down, you can see when the things were posted. So here's an inventory of when the essays have been posted. And some years I've written as many as 25, and some years I've posted as few as 3. So it really depends on what else is going on, and it's goes up as material presents itself to me. There's an area for comments, and then at the bottom of that page that you see when you click on it are the 10 most popular posts. So by far the most popular essay I've ever written was What Jackie Liked to Eat. And this was based on menus that I acquired from the estate of Renee Verdun, which was her chef. Right on the heels of that, there's something about the Cafe Martin, quite a long article. The Cafe Martin operated on Madison Square in New York for 10 years at the turn of the last century. And was really a very fashionable place. The third most popular is an essay about a place called Welch's. Sandy Welch was a restaurateur on Nassau Street, and Edgar Allan Poe worked across the street at the New York Mirror, and he would walk across the street and meet with fellow journalists at Sandy Welch's. And maybe 1 or 2 decades after his death, there was some recollections in New York of when he read the Raven to them at Sandy Welch's, stanza by stanza as he wrote it, getting their feedback and critique. So it's a menu from 1847, and it really takes you back to the time of Edgar Allan Poe. Rectors of Lobster Palace on Times Square, Mama, Where's Your Pa, about the 1884 presidential election. Further down the list, Dining at a Love Hotel in the Gilded Age. This was a menu from a hotel that never advertised. Very difficult to find any information. In fact, even the menu itself didn't have the name of the hotel. The name of the hotel was the Palette Hotel. They just had an artist's palette on the cover. And it was very hard to decipher. Finally, I contacted a man who's written about the sin-loving New York in the Gilded Age, books like that. And he directed me towards a Vice report in 1890, which gave me an idea of what the hotel was like. It was an upper class establishment for sure. The prices were in league with Delmonico's and Sherry's. The Princess, this is a story about a riverboat on the Mississippi, another more famous riverboat. And then lastly, fresh eggs in California, where I'm showing menus from the early 1850s in San Francisco, and the sub-theme of that particular story is the price of eggs. Some eggs were brought from Boston via clipper ships, so they were 4 or 5 months old at the minimum. And then there were fresh eggs, local fresh eggs, which were quite scarce, and they were very expensive in the early years in San Francisco. And menus would offer both eggs from Boston and just eggs. So I explore what San Francisco was like shortly after gold was discovered. So I mentioned this word sleuth work, and I thought I would expand on that a little bit. Menus are a list of foods, but they're also cultural expressions with ideals and values of society. You could call them marketing documents and filled with exaggeration and hype. They're also ephemera that provides unwitting historical evidence of what, when, where, and who, and what people were doing. So it can be approached on many different levels. And I was going through a box of old menus a number of years ago. The menus spanned a 100-year span of time. And I came across 45 menus that seemed to be related to one another. And they dated from 1869 to 1882. And I arranged them on a table in chronological order. And they came from many different places. And some of those places didn't make any sense. But I had the feeling that all these menus had been torn out of a scrapbook. And I was able to determine that they were saved, most likely saved by a restaurateur, caterer, hotel steward in New York by the name of Antonio Sivori. And I wrote a 4-part series on my blog called The Life and Times of Antonio Sivori that I learned from exploring what this man had done over his life. He was a very interesting person. He was born in Genoa in 1819. He emigrated to New York about 1835. He got a job at Delmonico's. He served in the Civil War in a regiment that was filled with French chefs from New York City. Abraham Lincoln and Mary Lincoln drove out to their camp, which would be where Catholic University is today in Washington. And they cooked dinner for them. And Lincoln said it was the best meal he'd ever had during the war. So these menus were interesting. Some of them were quite obvious. Savori's restaurant, or here's one, St. Mark's restaurant, A. Sivori, proprietor. What made this interesting is that these menus are probably within a year of each other. So it was quite an itinerant career. Here's one from a year earlier, 1869, the Sons of St. Patrick, and you can see where somebody has, Antonio Sivori has priced out the banquet for this group of Irish descendants. One of the most interesting things about these 45 menus were menus that came from charity balls at the Academy of Music. Here's one from the Infant Asylum Ball in 1875. It says Delmonico. So this was catered by Delmonico's, and Sivori had not worked for Delmonico's for 25 years. But reading his obituary in 1893, you can see where during the great, what was then called the Great Depression, later now called the Long Depression, he circled back to his first employer and did jobs for them. And so this was a ball catered by Delmonico with Antonio Sivori as the caterer. Here's one from the Hebrew, a charity ball. Doesn't have Sivori's name on it. Here's one that does, from the New York Roman Catholic Orphan Asylum. and Lady Washington Reception, which was a Protestant charity for a hospital ship. Here's a couple of others. Now you can see by 1878, he's working at the Westminster Hotel, but he's still catering these events. And then Society of the Crescent and Cross. So it really is a reflection of the melting pot of New York. People raised money. There was no social safety net, so the charities were secular or religious, and they raised money by holding these events, all catered by the same person. It said in his obituary, for 7 years, he was the top caterer in New York. And this is that period. By 1880-81, Louis Sherry came on the scene. He was very successful. Delmonico's decided that maybe it would be worth their while to work in the homes of the rich. So they began catering. And with the Gilded Age in full swing, no one caterer, one restaurant would dominate the social scene the way Sivori had once done. He went on from this, and he was the president of the Italian Benevolent Society in the early 80s when Italian immigration picked up in New York. There were very few Italians in New York before then. He worked for the railroads, opening important resort hotels, and then died at a relatively young age at 1893. The thing that was interesting to me was how could somebody so well known and so relevant to the social workings of New York have been completely forgotten? This is a question that somebody else asked, and it was Professor David Shields, University of South Carolina. And he wrote this book, The Culinarians, with 170 biographies of people like Antonio Sivori. In fact, he included Antonio Sivori in his book. Came to realize afterward that not only Sivori, but other people, similar people who have been forgotten, he combed through all of those essays with a fine comb, but the biggest catch was these 4-part series about Antonio Sivori, which he included with attribution. Normally, historians, food writers, restaurant critics, and so forth, and I've worked with quite a few of them over the years who use my collection, collaborate and come to see the menus in person. But in this case, he and his cohorts simply mined the information off my website, and like I say, it gave me full attribution, and it was a wonderful thing to say. When I first heard about this book being published, I was very concerned, thinking, oh my goodness, I could have contributed some information and all that. Well, they had already picked up all the information, and they didn't miss a thing. So quite a job of historical research, I must say. It's a great book. So I hope you'll visit my website and explore things that may have been of interest to you. So Jerry, with that, I will stop the share, and thank you for having me today.
Well, thank you for your presentation. I understand the Guerrilla Club is going to be doing a exhibition of your menus.
Yes, it's going to open in May 2023.
Okay, and it's online now. So how about we have you back for another episode of Biblioconnected, and you can talk about the online exhibit.
I'd be delighted, Jerry. Thank you.
Okay, and that's about it for Biblioconnected today. Y'all come back now, you hear?
And welcome back live to the Rare Book Cafe, the book lovers' rendezvous where the topics are priceless. Where else on the internet can you hear what you heard today? From Dr. Seuss to Danish fine press to things people left behind in their books to George de Maurier to menus. What a great show. And we have got a super show for you next week. Before I sign out, let me say goodbye to Lee. Lee, are you still with us? Hey, there she is. Lee, when's your next segment? What are you going to be?
I frankly don't know.
Okay.
I know that on the 20th, Larry Baker is going to be with us, and he is going to be talking about Flannery O'Connor, and I may have something to do with that. I also wanted to mention that on March the 23rd, PBS American Masters is doing a thing on Flannery O'Connor, and so it'll be interesting to watch, especially after hearing from Jerry. Can I share a menu very quickly?
Let's see it.
Okay. This is from a private event at a restaurant in Philadelphia called Voigt in the Bullitt Building, which was built for a bank, but then became one of the first really skyscraper office buildings. The menu is in French. The group that it was for is the United States group of some friends of something that I can't translate. It was a group of 18 people, one of them from Paris. That's on the back. But the interesting thing about it is that on March the 6th, 1888, this is from Saturday, November the 3rd, 1888, there was an article in the Philadelphia Inquirer about the restaurant saying that the waiters had gone out on strike, protesting that one of their number had been fired because he was allegedly overcharging the customers and I assume pocketing the overage. And they made some demands, which was to reinstate their colleague, which the owner did not do, but they also wanted better food and to be paid, what basically meant be paid overtime for longer work. And so I think that was kind of interesting. And they did their request to Mr. Bolt, who owned the restaurant, in a circular format so that none of them were showing up as the ringleader, but it was done kind of in pie wedges with each of their names so that none of them were showing up as the ringleader. About half of them quit. And it was right before the dinner service, so he had to fill in with people from other hotels. But he was known to say that some of those he was glad to be rid of. So this was in 1888. But I thought that was kind of interesting. The menu itself is very, very pretty. I think it may be handwritten. If there were only 18 of them, it certainly could be, could be hand colored. But a very French-looking woman. I'd like to get it translated so I can figure out what this was the American group for. But anyway, that was what I had. So
you always have the coolest stuff.
Oh, well.
We've been talking a lot about paper today, and in next week's show, we're going to be a paper show. We are going to have Iris Nevins, who does marbled paper. Personally, I think she's a national treasure. She does some of the most beautiful marbled paper, and her other talent is she makes Irish harps.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
Well, and Mary Kay's first book on A Midsummer Night's Dream, which I bought a copy of at the Florida show in 2019. 2019. That last show we had down there for my grandchildren who are big Shakespeare fans, even at 6 and 8.
Wow.
And you can see my little display, I think, of Shakespeare stuff up there on the shelf up there.
Okay, yeah.
So, but I looked up the picture of Mary Kay holding her book. Our artist's son had done a little portrait of Shakespeare to take to the show, and I have a picture of Mary Kay holding her book with the little portrait of Shakespeare. But
there is hope for humanity.
Wonderful. Hers are just wonderful.
There's hope for humanity. A 6 and an 8-year-old that are enthralled by Shakespeare.
They have skulls. They have some little skulls.
Our other guest next week is going to be Professor Imam Ali Salim from the University of Cairo. He is a expert in papyrus, both as a conservationist and as a historian. And of course, next week, we're also going to have our usual video guests and segments from What I Found in This Book to Lynn Thompson. Thank you, everybody. Just remember, this is the Book Lovers Rendezvous, where the topics are priceless and the conversation is free. See you next week.